Well, good morning. A little bit of a chilly morning this morning, but I'm thankful for the almost plus temperatures I'm working in lately. Today I want to talk about something I come across quite a bit, and it's not something that I would call out normally, but I have to because when you buy an older home, you oftentimes have to upgrade certain features of the house because modern standards are higher and insurance companies require you to upgrade. So this is one example. It's the service entrance to this house that needs to be upgraded. Again, I would say that even though it's only a 60 amp service, it's fine. However, insurance companies want you to have 100. Now, I think, well, I won't get into all the details, but basically 60 is probably adequate, but 100 is what's going to be required from 95% of the insurers. So that means you're going to have to outlay. It depends on where you're at and which electrician you get, and if you find family, friends, or whatever that can do it for you or help you with it, it's going to be somewhere in that $1,500 to $3,500 range to upgrade this. So let me show you what's involved and how it's calculated, why we decided to do this. All right, so there's a few components on the outside of a house for the electrical system. So the wire comes in from the pole, either above ground or below ground. In this case, the older homes is almost all above ground. The wires going through the air are rated for 100 amps generally because they're not even particularly large, but they're rated at a higher rating because they go through the air and they stay cooler under load. When you put the wires into a casing like they have here, then the same size wire is rated for a lower rating because it heats up more and it reacts different to the flow of electrons going through it. So in this case, the size of the wire, I'm not an expert, but I can tell that this wire is rated for 60 amps, possibly 70, but probably 60. And given the age of the house, that was pretty commonplace back in the 50s and the early 60s. So this meter is rated for 200 amp. So a lot of people would say, well, I have a 200 amp service. No, we always rate the service based on the weakest link. And I always explain this to my customers by saying, if you had a chain and you were pulling a vehicle out and that chain had one link that was worn down to a quarter of its normal size, if you pull hard enough, that chain will break, and it will break at that weakest link. So if the chain is rated for, let's say it's rated for 15,000 pounds, but that one link will break at 6,000 pounds, then you have a 6,000 pound chain, despite the fact that 99% of the chain is good to 15,000. So the same goes here. So whatever the weakest link is in the system, that's what the rating is for the whole house. In this case, the weakest link is this wire, and the main breaker inside the panel is a 60 amp. So we have to call this a 60 amp service entrance. When you apply for insurance, the insurance company will say, what is the size of your service entrance? And a lot of times you'll have a 100 amp main breaker on the panel, but the wire is still only rated for 60. So as a home inspector, I rate the system as 60, and that's how we're trained to do. And again, I don't necessarily agree that a 60 is not big enough for a house of this size and this age. It's been working well for 65 years, but nowadays they want you to upgrade. So what do you have to do? In this case, what you have to do is you have to not only change the panel or the main breaker, I'll get into that in a minute, but you also have to change these two wires here. So the wire leading from the mast up here, and you have to change it all the way down to the meter, and then on the other side of the meter from here into the panel has to be changed. Now the panel in this case is rated for 100 amps, but it only has a 60 amp main breaker. So the option there, and I'm not an electrician, so I'm not sure what the rules are for changing that out, but you could technically just change the breaker to 100 amp because that's what the panel is rated for, and change these two wires, and you're good. Some electricians say, oh no, we don't like these old Federal Pacific panels and we want to change this up to a new modern panel that's rated for 100 amp. If that's the case, then you're going to pay somewhere between $1,500 and $3,500 to change this system out in our area anyway. And again, that depends on family, friends, electricians where you can get materials, all kinds of different factors, but I've seen it as low as $1,100 a few years ago and as high as $3,500, depending. Now, I'm in a small town today that's out of the way, so if you don't get a local electrician, that's going to cost you more for mileage. So again, if you're buying a house with an older home, check the service entrance size, check the wire size, check the breaker size, and the rating on the panel itself is important. So, and I'll show you that from the inside here in a second. It's a costly expense, and if you're not prepared for it, it could surprise you and draw your bank account down to where you're not comfortable with. So knowing this ahead of time is pretty important. It's nobody's fault, and the buyers need to know, and the sellers don't want to change it because it's been working fine, but insurance companies kind of force our hands nowadays. On the inside, you can see that the panel is rated for, not rated, sorry, but it has a 60 amp main breaker. But if you look down here, it's rated for 120 volts, right here, 100 amp max. Okay, so it's technically suitable for 100 amps. There's an argument with a lot of electricians that this old style Federal Pacific breaker system, the breakers don't trip like they should. And if you put them under load at 15 amps, it should trip a 15 amp breaker. But some people will show you on YouTube and so on that they won't trip. You get them up to 20 amps or 25 amps before they trip, and that will overheat the wire and cause a fire. I don't know if I agree with all of that. I think it's true, but I don't think it's true for every single breaker in this type of panel. So in any case, you can decide what you feel comfortable with and whether or not you want to change the entire panel out. In some cases, like I said, you might not have the option to decide for yourself. The electrician might say, I won't change that main breaker. I want to change the whole panel, and that's the only way I'll do the job. And if they say that, and maybe the code requires that, that's what you have to do. In that case, you're up in that $3,500 range.